She was carrying a tray of creme brulee when the laughter started, sharp, sneering, and aimed like a dagger. A table of 4 near the front of the upscale bistro had locked eyes on her forearms, where the edge of her black uniform sleeves had slightly rolled up, revealing faded but unmistakable scars. One woman, blonde and dripping in designer labels, tilted her head and smirked. "Must have been a wild night, huh?" she said loudly, as if her comment were just playful banter. Her companions snickered, but there was nothing lighthearted about the way their eyes scanned the waitress like a bug under glass. A man leaned closer to the woman beside him and whispered something. Whatever he said made her bark with laughter. The waitress, whose name was Raina, paused only for a second. Just enough to breathe in the humiliation. Just enough to remember where she was. She placed the tray gently on their table, nodded without meeting anyone's gaze, and turned away as the whispers intensified behind her. The woman wasn't done. "Hey," she called out, voice shrill, "you missed a spot on your arm. Might want to cover that up before people lose their appetites." It was the kind of comment designed to draw blood. The table laughed again, louder this time, as if Raina's discomfort was the main course. A hush started to ripple through the restaurant. Eyes lifted from menus and phones. Couples stopped mid-bite. It wasn't the first time Raina had endured cruelty on the job. But the sheer volume of the mockery, and how pointed it was, how deliberate, sent a heat of shame up her spine. She made it to the waiter's station with her breath held in her chest. Her co-worker Eli, drying glasses behind the counter, glanced at her and froze. "They talking about your arms again?" he asked, voice low. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Moments later, the manager approached, dressed in his usual starched shirt and forced smile. Greg was more concerned with the atmosphere than the dignity of his staff. "Raina," he said, his voice clipped but trying to sound understanding, "I need you to be more mindful of presentation, especially with our higher-end guests." He gestured subtly toward her arms. "We've had complaints." Raina stared at him for a long second. "You mean the people laughing about my scars?" "I'm saying," he interrupted, now more direct, "that some guests are uncomfortable. Just, maybe keep your sleeves down, or I can reassign you to the kitchen tonight if that makes things easier." It was like being punched in the stomach with corporate politeness. Eli stood frozen, his hand wrapped in a dish towel, eyes flicking between them. Raina wanted to say something, to ask why being the target of abuse meant she was the one who needed to disappear. But instead, she nodded once and walked to the back. Her sleeves would stay down, not because of shame, but because she knew how to pick her battles. For now, if you're feeling the weight of that moment, you're not alone. Stories like Raina's happen more often than we think, where quiet strength is mocked, and scars are misunderstood. If this moved you already, take a second to like this video, subscribe for more powerful stories like this, and share it with someone who needs a reminder to look deeper before judging. Now, let's keep going, because what happens next will change everything. The next week, the same group returned, same woman in high heels, same condescension stitched into her smile. They were louder this time, more entitled. It was a Friday night, and the restaurant was buzzing. Reservations stacked, kitchen backed up. Raina noticed them the moment she came out with a tray of appetizers for another table. But there was someone new sitting with them. An older man, white hair, worn eyes, back straight like it had been trained to hold weight. His presence was quiet, but there was something about him that made Raina slow her step. Not fear, not shame, just familiarity. As she moved through the room, Raina heard snippets. "He's a retired colonel or something," the blonde woman said. "Came back from overseas like 20 years ago. My dad knows him through some government thing. He's kind of a big deal. Likes things proper." Raina kept moving. Orders to take, trays to lift. She stayed out of their section as long as she could. But it was only a matter of time before Greg cornered her again. "Table 6 asked for you specifically. Apparently, you were their waitress last time and they'd like consistency." Raina looked over. Blonde woman raised her wine glass in a mock toast. Greg added, "Please just be careful with the whole vibe thing this time." She nearly rolled her eyes but swallowed it down. "Got it." She approached the table slowly, not out of fear but because something in the veteran's expression had shifted. His eyes were fixed, not on her face, but her left forearm, as she took their drink orders. He leaned forward, eyebrows slightly furrowed. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gravel and dignity. "Is that a 173rd Airborne tattoo?" Raina blinked. "Yes, sir, paratrooper." He paused. "Where?" "Corangal Valley, 2010. For a moment, the world tilted. The table went silent. The blonde woman tilted her head in confusion. "Wait, what?" The man looked stunned. "You were in the Corangal in 2010. Raina nodded slowly. "Second deployment, 10 months. He sat back, quiet for a breath. "I was there in 2007. We lost a lot of good people." There was a heavy silence. Not uncomfortable, reverent. He looked down at her arms. "Those scars, are they from?" He didn't finish the sentence. Raina didn't flinch. "IED. Convoy hit a dirt trail outside Camp Blessing. 6 of us inside. I was the only one who walked away." No one at the table laughed this time. The veteran placed his utensils down. "What's your name, soldier?" "Raina. Raina James." He stood up slowly, napkin falling from his lap. In the middle of that restaurant, he extended his hand. "Colonel David Halverson, it's an honor." She shook it, firm and steady. His eyes shone with something more than respect, recognition. "You saved lives out there," he said. "I've read the after-action reports." "That was you?" Raina nodded. "They pinned a medal to my chest and shipped me home. But the scars stayed." He looked around the table. "And this is how she's treated?" No one answered. The blonde woman looked away. Raina didn't need the restaurant anymore. She didn't need their silence or their pity. In that moment, she had been seen, not as a waitress, not as someone to mock, but as a soldier, a survivor, a sister in arms. Colonel Halverson remained standing for several seconds longer than necessary, his gaze sweeping the table like a quiet reprimand. The other guests shrank slightly in their chairs, suddenly less certain of their importance. The blonde woman, who just moments ago had been directing the conversation with haughty confidence, now avoided Raina's eyes entirely. Her wine glass trembled slightly as she set it down, the clink against the coaster louder than she intended. Raina didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes. She gave a small nod to the colonel and turned to fulfill their drink order without waiting for another word. But her hands trembled slightly as she reached the counter, less from nerves and more from adrenaline. Eli noticed. "You good?" he asked. She exhaled, finally allowing herself to process what had just happened. "Yeah," she said, voice soft, "better than I've been in a long time." Back at table 6, the silence hung heavy. Colonel Halverson finally eased back into his seat but kept his eyes trained on the guests seated with him. "Do any of you realize what it means to wear that tattoo?" he asked. His voice still calm, but heavy with weight. "That's not some decorative ink. That mark is earned. You don't get to laugh at it. You don't get to reduce it to a joke just because you've never had to carry a wounded friend on your back while enemy fire cracked through the trees." One of the men across from him, mid-40s, custom suit, a fading tan that suggested golf more than grit, cleared his throat awkwardly. "We didn't know, sir. We just thought, she didn't seem." "Didn't seem what?" the colonel asked sharply, eyes narrowing. "Didn't seem like someone who gave 4 years of her life to keep you free to sip overpriced Merlot and make jokes at a stranger's expense." The man fell quiet. Across the table, the blonde woman finally spoke, voice defensive and thin. "Look, we weren't trying to insult her. It was just a misunderstanding." Halverson didn't respond right away. Instead, he pulled a small, worn dog tag from around his neck and placed it gently on the table. "My best friend bled out in that valley. A roadside bomb took his legs. We waited nearly 40 minutes for the evac. Every second felt like eternity. That woman," he gestured toward the kitchen where Raina had disappeared behind the swinging door, "has lived through hell most people wouldn't survive. And you mocked her." He let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Meanwhile, Raina returned with their drinks. Her shoulders squared and her gaze calm. She approached the table like a soldier approaching formation, measured, dignified, unapologetic. She placed the drinks in front of each person without speaking. But when she reached Colonel Halverson, he stood again, this time with intention. "Miss James," he said clearly, his voice raised just enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "I owe you more than a drink. I owe you a thank you for your service, your courage, and your grace." He lifted his glass in a slow, deliberate toast to the quiet warriors who carry more than we see, to those whose scars are proof of battles survived. Around them, other tables began to pay attention. A few guests, unsure of what was happening, paused mid-conversation. A man in his 50s, seated nearby with his wife, nudged her gently and murmured, "She's a vet." The news rippled through the dining room like an awakening. Subtle, reverent, even the kitchen staff paused, some peeking through the doors. Raina, for the first time in years, felt the heaviness in her chest lift, not because people were clapping or giving her attention, but because someone had finally seen her for who she really was. Greg, the manager, had been watching from a distance, his brow furrowed with confusion. He approached cautiously, catching only the tail end of the colonel's toast. "Everything all right over here?" he asked, trying to read the room. Colonel Halverson turned to face him. This woman served with the 173rd Airborne Brigade in one of the deadliest combat zones we've known. "You should be honored to have her on your staff." Greg blinked. I didn't realize." "Maybe take the time to ask," the colonel said, instead of letting customers humiliate her for doing something most people wouldn't have the courage to attempt. Raina looked at her manager then, not with anger, but with a quiet kind of disappointment. The kind that says, "I expected more." Greg cleared his throat. "Raina, She gently shook her head. "It's all right, you've said enough." With that, she returned to the kitchen, not in defeat, but in strength. Back at the table, the blonde woman's voice was barely above a whisper now. "We had no idea. I didn't mean." "Intentions don't erase harm," the colonel interrupted, not unkindly, but firmly. "She carries those scars so you don't have to." There was no applause, no big production, just a room full of people watching as quiet truth replaced loud ignorance. Later that evening, as the dinner crowd dwindled and closing time neared, Colonel Halverson approached the counter where Raina was wiping down menus. "I meant what I said," he told her. "You remind me of the best soldiers I knew. Tough, steady, silent until it matters." Raina looked at him, her eyes a little softer now. "Most days, I don't feel like a soldier anymore." "You're still in the fight," he said, tapping his chest, "just a different kind of battlefield now." He reached into his coat and pulled out a silver coin, etched with the emblem of his unit. "We give these to those who've gone above and beyond. I'd be honored if you accepted this." She took it in her hand, surprised by the weight, not just physical, but what it meant. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded, then leaned in slightly. "Next time someone asks about your scars," he said, "tell them it's the signature of a life that didn't quit." Raina held that silver coin in her palm long after Colonel Halverson left the restaurant. She didn't slip it into her pocket right away. She just let it sit there, solid, cool, dignified. Something about its weight was anchoring, like it reminded her she hadn't been invisible all this time, that she hadn't endured those months of therapy, sleepless nights, and endless "you're so strong" platitudes for nothing. That somewhere, somehow, the fight had been witnessed, even if it took years for someone to acknowledge it. That acknowledgement hadn't come from an award ceremony or a government office. It had come in the middle of a dining room from a man who recognized truth, even when wrapped in a waitress's apron. Back in the staff area, Eli waited for her. "That guy," he said with raised brows. "He looked like he was about to square up with those customers on your behalf." Raina chuckled softly. "He was airborne, same unit I served in." Eli leaned back like he'd been hit with a wave of understanding. "That explains everything." Raina tucked the coin into her front pocket, then glanced back at the dining room. The mood had shifted. People who had once stared at her with snide curiosity were now looking away, as if ashamed of their earlier assumptions. A few regulars nodded in her direction. One woman mouthed a quiet, "Thank you." The air, once thick with casual judgment, now carried the heaviness of reflection. Later that night, as she changed out of her uniform, Raina caught her reflection in the mirror above the lockers. Her arms were bare now, sleeves rolled up again, unapologetically. The scars weren't grotesque, they weren't something to hide. They were part of her, etched reminders of a story most people couldn't bear to hear, let alone live through. For the first time in a long time. She didn't wince at them. She didn't pull her sleeves back down. She didn't shrink. But word travels fast in small cities. The next morning, someone posted about the incident on a local community forum. The post was simple. To the woman at the bistro who was mocked for her scars and turned out to be a war hero, thank you. And to the colonel who stood up and saluted her, you reminded us what honor looks like. The comments poured in, hundreds within hours, messages of support, apologies from strangers who said they'd seen but said nothing, stories from veterans who knew what it felt like to come home and be misjudged. And then, something else happened. A local reporter called the restaurant. Greg took the call, nervously pacing outside the office. They want to do a story, he said, later that afternoon, avoiding Raina's gaze. Feature you, maybe the colonel too. Raina blinked. What? They said it's good for the community. He continued, something about healing, courage, public acknowledgement, that sort of thing. Raina hesitated. She wasn't sure she wanted to be on camera, paraded around like some hometown heroine. That wasn't why she served. That wasn't why she kept going. But she also knew there was power in visibility. Maybe someone needed to see her. Maybe another woman, another soldier, another person carrying silent wounds would hear her story and believe they still mattered. She agreed, but on her terms. The news segment aired that Friday evening. A quiet, respectful profile. They showed clips of Raina at work, talked about her time in the military, interviewed Colonel Halverson. When they asked about the scars, Raina didn't flinch. They're not shameful, she said simply. They're just proof I showed up. The colonel, seated beside her during the interview, added, too often we honor people after they're gone. But Raina, she's here, she's standing. That's worth saluting. The footage of him standing in the middle of the restaurant and raising his hand in a formal salute was played on loop. It caught fire online. Thousands of shares. Veterans groups reposted it. People from all walks of life began tagging her with messages like, thank you. You matter, I see you. But for Raina, the best part wasn't the public attention. It was what happened when she returned to work the next day. Greg, waiting near the staff entrance, handed her a letter. This came for you. It was from the woman at the table, the one who had led the laughter. The envelope was simple, the handwriting careful. Inside was a short note. Raina, I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve it. What I did was cruel. I was ignorant, and I am deeply sorry. I watched that news story 3 times. You changed something in me. Thank you for showing me what grace looks like. I will do better. There was no signature, just a return address. Raina folded the letter quietly and slipped it into her locker. That evening, the restaurant felt different, quieter, kinder. Raina noticed it in the way people addressed her. Not with pity, not with performative reverence, but with a new kind of attentiveness, like they finally saw her as a person. A full story, not just a server with scars. Colonel Halverson came back that night too, sat at a different table this time, waved her over just to say hello. You changed that place, he said. Raina smiled. Not just me. He leaned forward. It only takes one match to light a room. But someone's gotta strike it first. She thought about that for a moment. How many places she'd been where no one saw her. How many jobs, cities, moments she'd gone through without being known. And how, with one confrontation, one truth, one person willing to stop and ask the right question, everything shifted. That night, before she left, she stood in the empty dining room for a moment longer than usual. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed, the room still carried echoes of voices and plates and soft music. But all she heard was peace. She rolled her sleeves up before walking out. The next week, something unexpected began to happen. Raina's shift wasn't even an hour in when an older black couple approached her quietly as she refilled water glasses. The woman placed her hand gently over Raina's and said, "We saw you on the news. My brother served in Vietnam. He would have been proud of you. We are too." The man gave her a nod of deep respect and left behind a $100 tip on a $40 meal. By the following Friday, the restaurant's reservation list was full of names that Greg didn't recognize. The sudden surge of interest had little to do with the food. People were coming to catch a glimpse of the woman with the scars, the veteran with a tray and a story. They weren't gawking, they were showing up like pilgrims. hoping to feel something deeper in a world gone numb. Greg, for his part, had undergone a subtle transformation. His clipped orders softened. He started pitching in more during rushes. At one point, he even asked Raina, awkwardly but sincerely, if she'd be willing to train the new hires. "You've got something people want to learn from," he admitted, "not just table service." Raina agreed, but with one condition. "You treat them right. Every single one." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." On Saturday evening, during the second dinner wave, a group of middle-aged bikers walked in, clean leather jackets, solemn faces. One of them wore a patch that read OEF 2009. And when he spotted Raina, he raised 2 fingers to his forehead in a casual salute. She nodded back. No words exchanged. Some things didn't need explanation. Later that night, after closing, Eli asked her something that had been on his mind. "Do you think you'd go back?" he said, handing her a chilled soda. "Back into the military, I mean." Raina shook her head slowly. "Not in uniform, but maybe in purpose. There are different ways to serve." He leaned against the wall beside her, nodding. "I think you're doing it already." That week, a local high school invited her to speak at their Veterans Day assembly. Raina hesitated. The idea of standing in front of hundreds of kids felt harder than patrolling a ridge with enemy fire crackling in the distance. But she went. She stood in front of that gymnasium, the bleachers packed with wide eyes and restless feet, and told them what no textbook could. Bravery isn't loud. It's waking up when everything hurts and choosing to keep going. It's being mocked and showing kindness anyway. It's carrying scars and not letting them become walls. A senior raised his hand and asked what the hardest part of service had been. Raina didn't even have to think. "Coming home," she said, "and feeling like I had to hide the best and worst parts of myself just to be accepted again." There was a stillness in that room afterward, the kind that sinks in deep. 2 weeks later, a small local charity invited her to join their board for veteran outreach. She accepted, offering not just her story, but her heart. She helped set up counseling sessions, resume workshops, and quiet coffee hours for women veterans who felt alone in their own hometowns. One woman, a former combat medic, showed up in tears and whispered, "I thought I was the only one." Raina simply said, "You're not." Back at the bistro, things had settled into a strange, beautiful new rhythm. Regulars treated her with new warmth. Staff meetings now included conversations about empathy and dignity. Greg even added a framed newspaper clipping of Raina's story on the wall near the host stand. Not for spectacle, but as a quiet reminder. And then one night, close to Christmas, something happened that stopped Raina in her tracks. She was wiping down a booth when a young girl, no older than 8, walked up with her parents. The girl had burns along her hands and lower arms. She looked nervous, her little fingers twisting the hem of her cardigan. Her mother crouched down and whispered something in her ear. And then the girl stepped forward and said, "My teacher showed us your story. She said you're brave like a lion." Raina knelt to her level. "I think you're brave like a lion too." The girl's eyes lit up. "Really?" Raina rolled up one sleeve. "We match, don't we?" The girl giggled and nodded. As the family walked away, the mother mouthed a tearful thank you. And Raina, standing in the soft golden light of the bistro's chandeliers, felt something swell in her chest, not pain, not pride, but peace. That night, she closed her locker gently and reached into her coat pocket. She ran her thumb along the edge of the colonel's silver coin. She had begun keeping it with her at all times, not as a trophy, but as a symbol, a marker of the day the world shifted, the day a room full of strangers finally looked past the surface. The day she stopped shrinking. She paused before stepping outside into the cold air. Snow had just started to fall, soft and steady, coating the street in quiet white. She didn't pull her sleeves down. She didn't try to hide. She simply walked through the night, unburdened and whole. The snow kept falling as Raina walked home, coating the sidewalk in a soft, silent white that seemed to hush the whole world. Each step crunched gently beneath her boots, but for once, she didn't feel the weight of her past pressing down on her shoulders. Instead, the night felt wide and open, like the sky itself had made space for her. She wasn't hurrying to disappear anymore. She wasn't gripping her sleeves to shield her arms from stares or whispers. She let the cold brush her skin, and it felt more like a cleansing than a punishment. Her scars no longer burned beneath the surface, they breathed. They were alive, and she wasn't ashamed. The next morning, she stopped by a local cafe she hadn't visited in months. It was small and cozy. The kind of place with chipped mugs and mismatched chairs and a community board filled with babysitting flyers and lost cat notices. The barista, a young man with dreads tucked under a beanie, recognized her instantly. "Wait, aren't you the vet from the news?" he asked. Blinking in surprise, "You're kind of a legend in this neighborhood now." Raina smiled and shrugged. "I'm just someone who didn't quit." He gave her the coffee on the house. "For what it's worth," he said, handing it over, "your story helped my sister. She's been in a really dark place since her deployment. She saw that clip of you and the colonel, and something changed. She finally signed up for a support group." Raina's chest tightened. "Tell her she's not alone," she said, "and that I'm proud of her." He nodded, eyes damp. "I will." That was the pattern now. Strangers walking up to her not out of curiosity, but connection. Veterans, survivors, teens navigating identity, elders who'd been carrying quiet grief for decades. Her pain had become a bridge, and through it, people were finding their way across their own hidden valleys. Then, one afternoon in January, the bistro's front door opened and a sharply dressed man stepped inside. He wore a long wool coat, polished shoes, and a presence that said he was used to being listened to. But he didn't come with fanfare. He asked for Raina by name and waited quietly near the host stand. She approached cautiously. "Can I help you?" He extended a hand. "I'm Michael Jennings. I work with the Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm here because of you." Raina blinked. "Me?" He smiled. "Colonel Halverson forwarded your story. You've sparked something bigger than just a local news segment. There's talk about a statewide recognition program. They want you to speak at the Capitol next month. Not just about your service, but about your life after. What it means to return, rebuild, and resist invisibility." Raina took a breath. "I'm not a speaker. You are now," he said gently, "because people are listening." She stood still for a long moment, processing it. It wasn't about ego. It wasn't about applause. It was about impact. If she could keep one more veteran from giving up, one more teen from thinking their scars made them ugly, one more employer from silencing the stories that matter, then maybe this was her new mission. "I'll do it," she said, "but I'm not sugarcoating anything." He grinned. "Wouldn't expect you to." The next few weeks moved like water, flowing forward in ways Raina hadn't anticipated. She worked her usual shifts, but the air around her had shifted. It wasn't reverent or awkward, it was real. The other servers asked more questions. Eli started writing poetry again, inspired by her strength. Even Greg, who had once prioritized table turnover over dignity, began hosting monthly staff talks on unconscious bias and respectful communication. Raina led the first one. She didn't need a script. She just told the truth. When the day came for her to speak at the Capitol, she wore a simple navy blazer over her usual black slacks. No makeup, no fanfare, just a bracelet on her left wrist and her sleeves pushed neatly to the elbows. The scars were visible, so was the tattoo. The room was packed. Veterans, lawmakers, high school students, Gold Star families. Colonel Halverson was there, seated in the front row, nodding with quiet pride. Raina took the podium and spoke like she was speaking to a room full of old friends. She didn't read from a paper. She didn't recite bullet points. She shared moments. Moments of silence on helicopters as they carried the wounded. Moments of laughter in dirt-floored tents with people who would never come home. Moments of humiliation in dining rooms where her pain became someone else's entertainment. Moments of rising. "People think the fight ends when you take off the uniform," she said, "but for some of us, the fight begins the moment we try to come home. Not to a country, but to ourselves." There wasn't a dry eye in the room by the time she finished. And when Colonel Halverson stood up once more and saluted her, this time he wasn't alone. The whole room followed. Raina didn't smile out of pride that day. She smiled because she felt free. Not just free from the past. Free to belong. Free to speak. Free to live. Free to carry her scars like sacred scrolls instead of silent shame. That evening, back at the bistro, she returned to her shift like any other. Someone had left a small bouquet at the host stand with a note, "Because of you." I wore short sleeves today. Thank you. She tucked the note into her apron pocket, right next to the silver coin. She knew now what she was carrying, and she would carry it with joy. Because sometimes, the world doesn't change in revolutions. Sometimes, it changes when one woman chooses not to cover her scars. Raina's story reminds us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it quietly endures. It shows up for work. It survives mockery. It holds its head high when others try to drag it low. But most importantly, it inspires the world to see with new eyes. Scars are not weaknesses, they're witnesses, and those who carry them with grace are the true heroes among us. What would our world look like if we treated each other as more than what meets the eye? If we paused to ask instead of assume? If Raina's journey touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it, let's grow from it. And if this story stirred something in you, hope, empathy, strength, go ahead and like this video. Share it with someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe for more true, soul-awakening stories like this one. Because the world needs more light, and sometimes, that light comes from the very people we've overlooked the most.